What were some of those big tech choices that really impacted YCS Pittsburgh? Make sure you guys smash the crap out of that Dark Roller No More button so you guys don't miss out on more honestly, I think Dark Roller No More was one of the most interesting cards to see running around right now because two things that this card's able to do. You can Dark Roller No More a full Yummy field, alright, which then I guess technically forces them to trigger the Yummy Surprise to revive a piece so that they can kind of reconstruct their board. So, I mean, it also invalidates the Herald if the Herald is on the inboard piece, which actually means I don't have to deal with an Omni Negate and I don't have to deal with the punishing effects that the Herald has on top of that. But also, you can also use this against Draco Tail to turn off their nice little monster that's going to try to respond, you know, and start to pop your stuff when they fire Draco Tail effects. That's quite interesting, honestly. There were two lists within Top Cut that were actually playing Dark Roller No More, and honestly, I'm kind of surprised to see, because, you know, you don't really think enough about, like, how this format has structured to really make a decision and go, hey, you know, maybe things are kind of pivoting in a different direction now. You know, maybe if we're gonna, I mean, you've got just more slightly larger board breakers. I mean, Droplet's a very, very impactful card within the space right now as well. So it's not like that's not something that we're seeing play with. But my takeaways here are as follows. Dark Roller No More invalidates the very, very big problem cards that these builds or these fields set up, though, you know, Droplet is another card that can be used in combination with this to basically achieve the same result. It's also a card that you can force your opponent to try to blow some sort of response onto, and it just makes decks have a going second chance. I think those are all pretty important things. The Bystials. So, one thing that we saw out of this weekend was the craziness that a couple of Bystials could bring to the table. And we've got things like, yes, you could play a Magna Hut in the main deck. You know, the Magna Hut's going to bridge into something else during an end phase. But then, you know, the Druis Worm, Baldrake, Saronir. You know, a lot of these pieces are already limited within the space, but what happens when, you know, you start to play against Yummy and you're like, all right, cool, these are just free bodies that I can toss onto the field and start to take advantage of, and then your opponent's like, oh no, you know, you start to do, you know, these fusion lines of play with these extra bodies. I mean, it's not like you can't also recur back the Bystials with Draco Tail. Oh, yes, multi-purposing cards that are limited to one that I can re-access and use a second time. I would never have guessed that that could possibly be a problem, but honestly, being able to bump these annoyances, like Habagiri, for example, or, you know, Murakumo, when they're like, oh, hey, you know, we got tributed, we're going to try to come out of the graveyard now. And it's like, okay, well, if you've got a body on the field, now that Bystial is going to take care of that problem. And most builds are only playing one single Murakumo, which means the minute that Murakumo gets bumped out of the graveyard by a Bystial, you're going to have some problems that you're going to have to kind of deal with. So, you know, if these builds were extending out and playing like two Murakumo and the one Futsu, which is basically the extended package, you know, obviously I think you're digging into more bricks along that way, but I don't necessarily feel like it's worth it. But the Bystials definitely prove themselves. Good old Mulcharmy Meowls. Meow. Yeah, that's the sound I make too when I look at the what is deemed or been deemed the worst Mulcharmy of them all. But what ends up happening when the format actually lets you have access to Meowls, because Meowls is Graveyard and Banishment revives. Once again, we look at good old Murakumo and the rest of these guys who want to come back out of the graveyard. Yeah, you might not be getting a good chunk of summons off of these, but I mean, that's okay. Meowls is mainly going to be there for Malice. I too love punishing Malice and just generating all of this, I'm going to say free advantage, honestly, because every time the Malice player goes, pay 300 or 900, and you're like, excellent, I will take another. It's like, oh, thank you. I've got all this draw power coming into my hand now because your deck just kind of played into this Mulcharmy. Yeah, that's the thing. And I think right now Meowls being more of one of these kind of major game changers is kind of nice, honestly. Perulia, I think, definitely feels like the weakest of the Mulcharmies at the moment. Not saying that it's a terrible card, but we're just naturally kind of looking at the progression within the meta. And honestly, I mean, yeah, getting some cards off of the Yummy player as they're like special summons, from the hand. And, you're probably netting 2-3 cards off of that after it's all said and done. So it's not an entirely terrible trade-off when you're looking at that. And then there's the Lancia question. So, not everybody wants to dedicate spots in their side deck to Malice right now. Because a lot of people look at Malice and they're like, this isn't a real deck anymore. And understandably so. I don't hate the idea of looking at Malice and fundamentally going, yeah, I could see maybe it not performing up to the standard of what we were kind of expecting. But on the flip side of things, if you are still worried about the Malice player setting up one of their larger fields, then play the Lancia. And I think that's been a lot of the reassurance right now within this format is a lot of people just don't want to let go of Lancia. They're like, hey, I would rather just have this. I'd rather be safe than sorry. And that's respectable. I'm not going to hate on anybody that's like, oh, hey, I still have, a couple Malice players running around in my locals. Okay, well then you make the concession to choose to play these cards so that you can actually play the game. There's nothing wrong with having to be a little bit more prepared to counterpoint something within the meta. That's kind of the point of why we look at these side deck cards. If we think that we need these cards to handle problems, then you board them in. It is a pretty straightforward decision tree when you are looking at the meta. So, yes, big scary deck in Room Go Burr, which is Malice. Malice, can still top YCS. It got 9th place, for Christ's sake. It is still a deck that you need to respect. And if not, oh no, they lost their Splash Mage, which was their free play around of hand traps. They're able to keep going. Sure, but you gotta respect it a little bit. And then there's been the uptick in Dragon's Mind. So, Konami took our dear old friend Solemn Judgment out back, bent it over, and, put it to 1 during the last list, which, internal stun player me was crying, but the card just massively was crazy at Worlds. And the fact that the TCG just continues to look at this card and abuse the living crap out of it is not all that surprising. But now we've kind of been looking around for a replacement of sorts. And that's where Dragon's Mind comes in, because its job is to be the replacement. I mean, okay, yeah, I have to have something with a 2500 stat line, but that's not a problem. All right, Konami has printed so many more recent cards to work with Dragon's Mind. You can definitely tell that there's been a philosophy shift around recently with Konami really trying to push and promote the idea of, hey, these cards actually work together. Let's actually try them out. Let's actually make sure that, these bits and pieces are coming together, And that's exactly how it's been working. Dragon's Mind, paying $2,500 also to reset it is kind of crazy. I mean, I don't like the idea of being able to abuse that card a second time, but it's just how the current design philosophy has gone. So, for all intents and purposes, Dragon's Mind has become one of the better trap options within the space for the side deck. So, to nobody's surprise, what do you guys think? Please leave a comment down below. Tell me what you guys think, and bye-bye! patrons. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Check out these other videos.